Training camp is here, which means real NFL football is just around the bend. And as we draw nearer to that glorious day, the 2023 Cigar Thoughts Positional Breakdown Series chugs along. Today, we break down the linebacker position with former Seahawks linebacker and current sports radio host Dave Wyman. Let's light him up.
I'm Jacson Bevins, and this is Cigar Thoughts.
Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jacson Bevins, and along with my pristine producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts Podcast. Mike, how we doing today?
Feeling great, feeling clean, Jacson. We are through the doldrums of July and on to training camp. How are you?
Man, I'm so excited for today. Training camp's underway, which means we're getting close to full speed looks at these players. It also means preseason games are almost here, which of course means the season is almost here. And today we get to dive into all of that with someone who is very close to the action. But before we do, a quick reminder, you can still get your official Cigar Thoughts cigars directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link and place your order to get these easy to smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf. Or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram, as many of you have, and we'll send you the deets directly. You can also click the link in the show page on whatever platform you're listening to us on. At this point, the feedback is pretty overwhelming regarding the quality of the cigar experience, so get some for yourself or as a gift and help support the show at the same time. We'd also love for you to check out our YouTube channel, where you can catch entire episodes as well as video clips from every show, including this one. This is one of the best ways you can help Cigar Thoughts grow, so we're grateful for the few seconds it takes for you to like and subscribe the videos. Now, to everyone listening, you know how blessed we've been to have the guests we've had on this show, particularly for the Positional Breakdown series. From Walter Jones to Mina Kimes to Michael Bumpus to Colby Parkinson, Mike Dugar and Charles McDonald, it's been an awesome stretch where we've gotten to learn firsthand from some of the smartest people covering the sport, and today is no different, as we dig into the Seahawks linebackers with, wouldn't you know it, a former Seahawks linebacker. He played 9 years in the NFL, 6 of which were with Seattle, and he racked up over 550 tackles during his career. Now, he's the excellent co-host of the Wyman and Bob Show on 710 ESPN and will be a part of the play-by-play booth with Steve Rabel this season. And he is gracious enough to join us in the Cigar Lounge today. He is Dave Wyman. Dave, thanks for making the time.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate it. And we're going to spend some time talking about the current state of the Seahawks defense, focusing specifically on the linebackers. But I want to provide the listeners with some context that you are uniquely positioned to offer. You were drafted in 1987 out of Stanford, and it's safe to say the game has changed a lot in some ways, but has also remained consistent in others. So as someone who still covers the game, how has playing linebacker evolved since you were on the field?
Yeah, well, I think, what's funny is I feel like they do things differently now. I think when I played, especially when I played in a 3-4 where there's an uncovered guard over you, half your job is taken on blocks. But if you watch like Bobby Wagner, they try to free him up quite a bit. And so, that art form is kind of lost a little bit, but you don't see linebackers attacking the line of scrimmage every play. You see it every once in a while, but for the most part, I think taking on blocks, and that was something I had to learn how to do in the pros. I mean, when I was in college, I would take them on with my shoulder and my forearm and all that. And you just can't do that in the NFL because you get just swallowed up. So the 3 points of contact are your hands and your head. And that's just how you have to take on a blocker. But I think that has pretty much stayed the same, that part of it. But I don't know, I see more and more where there are linebackers, and especially if they're athletic, like Devin White or Bobby Wagner, which I watched Bobby Wagner run on a wheel route the other day with DJ Dallas, and he's in his, 12th year, 13th year. DJ's in his 3rd or 4th year, and he ran with him the entire way. Wow. But, I think guys like that, they're so gifted with ball skills and athletic ability that they try to free them up to do different things. Yeah, I was more of a battering ram than I was a linebacker, basically.
Well, yeah, and we say the term linebacker, but it's a little bit of an umbrella word, and depending on scheme personnel, it can cover a lot of different skill sets. I think a lot of us, at least me, when I hear linebacker, the first thing I think of is like a Dick Butkus or a Ray Lewis or a Bobby Wagner, these kind of off-ball, middle of the defense captain types.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also got the old school Sam and Will positions. Edge rushers are often considered linebackers. You've got, coverage backers as well. The game is getting not positionless, but a little bit more fluid position to position, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. You're right. And you see a lot of sort of hybrid guys like Jamal Adams and Julian Love that, and Jamal Adams is a pretty big guy. He's like 215, 220. So, and he's 6'2", even though he kind of plays like a smaller player. But they can move him down on the box. He can, it's kind of a hybrid. I kind of see the second level linebacker going away a little bit, just because they want speed in there, and to have both is really tough. There's a few guys, like I said, Devin White ran a 4.37, and that guy's the linebacker in Tampa.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder if that's going to be, because, we've been talking about running backs and the whole franchise tag and how they're just right above special teams. And I wonder if linebacker is going to start to, but that's all encompassing, because like you said, you're talking about defensive end, outside backer types. And really what you're talking about are second level linebackers.
Yes.
Guys that are off the ball. And there might be a couple of times where you see maybe one linebacker on the field this year for the Seahawks, just because they have Julian Love. They got 4 really good corners. And so, I would say in general, that's probably the way the game is trending.
Yeah, I'm actually so glad you mentioned that, because it's something that Mike and I have talked about before. Linebackers are kind of from, and again, by linebacker, we're talking about that second level defender. They are kind of the running backs of the defense in terms of how the NFL allocates salary. And Seattle's kind of bucked the trend in that way. They've been willing to pay Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright top of the league money. Do you think that Seattle is, and Pete Carroll specifically, is still a little bit old school in terms of seeing the value of those guys that are literally in the center of the defense?
Yeah, well, I think it takes a special kind of guy, and Bobby is definitely special. Mm-hmm. So, I think it, more than anything, more than the position, I think to them anyway, it's more about the person. I was talking, the player, I should say. I was talking to Lofa Tatupu about Bobby Wagner, and he said, that he's the best athlete that he's ever seen play linebacker. So, yeah, I mean, he is very special. So I wouldn't say necessarily that, but yeah, the way it's going right now, I thought KJ was special too, just from a leadership standpoint. And really his best year was his last year here in Seattle. So it's kind of odd, but
he's playing a new position too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think those two guys are really special, I guess is my point. But let's hope the linebacker's not going away.
Yeah, no kidding, man. I'm right there with it. I mean, it's kind of the first position I think of when I think of like football player. It's that guy, and I just think there's so much value into it. And we're pro analytics over here too, for sure. But the game is still the game, and you gotta have those guys there, and they are valuable. And like you look at Seattle's defense last year, they were pretty mercurial overall. I mean, they struggled during the first month, and then they went on that white hot tear in the middle of the season, helping the team win 4 straight games by double digits. Then they regressed. It kind of started with that game against Tampa, and then they never really got back to that midseason peak. As someone who's been in those trenches, what did you see that helped them play so well in October? And to what do you attribute their struggles the rest of the season?
It's a great question. It's funny. I was sitting in Germany in my hotel room and, trying to get my body clock right and everything. So I was going through all the stats, and I was looking at, I think it was the previous 4 games to the Tampa game.
Yep.
They played Arizona twice. I think the Chargers were in there, and then the Giants.
Yep.
And, they held Saquon Barkley to like 2.2 yards per carry. And the way they were trending at that point, I was like, okay, this could be the number 1 defense. They were top 5 in every category. Just got totally exposed in that Tampa Bay game. I mean, it was, and also...
And Tampa was bad at running, too. That was the crazy thing.
They were horrible. Yeah, they had a couple of games where they handed the ball off, I think, 3 times or 9 times. I mean... They
threw it almost 800 times last year.
Yeah, and they were dead last in the run game. And the reason I remember, they had 62 yards per game at that point, Well, they ran for 162 against the Seahawks defense. But, and the problem was they figured something out that the Seahawks, number one, were outmanned. And Bobby Wagner talked about this the other day. And I was trying to explain it on our show. But, when everybody has a gap, right, in the run fit or the run game.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they motion somebody in or they shift, that creates another gap. And they just weren't adjusting to that. There were more gaps than there were defenders in that game. And you could see the Tampa Bay offensive linemen were going to the sidelines like, let's go, man. We're going to crush these guys. We're going to run right down the field. And they did. So, that got kind of exposed. And then the other thing that was going on, I don't know if you guys have heard from Al Woods.
Mm-hmm.
Quandre Diggs has expressed this too, but Al Woods the other day said he wanted to play in the jet defense because he was tired of catching and reading.
Yep.
And that's kind of what they were trying to do. They were trying to two gap, which means the offensive line or the defensive lineman is going to come down the middle of the guy, and then he's going to pick a side. And then the linebacker, this is what it looked like to me anyway. Then the linebacker has to go to the opposite side that he doesn't pick, either the A or the B gap. Then you got the safety who's coming in to fill, and he's waiting to see what the linebacker was doing. So it was kind of a ripple effect. So they just weren't reacting. There's lots of times where I do a thing at our station called Football 101.
Yeah.
And, we were looking at a couple of plays. I think it was against Carolina, who ran all over them. The Raiders, where there's a double team on the defensive line by two offensive linemen, 4 total. And then one of them goes up to the linebacker, but the linebacker has to attack the line of scrimmage at that point when he sees that double team, and they just weren't doing that. So they weren't, I always felt like you should know what your gap is before the ball is snapped. And if they shift, then you're going to have to adjust and things like that. But trying to read what gap you have after the ball has snapped, I think you just can't do it. It just takes too much time. So I think they'll get more back to that. I think we heard from Draymond Jones in camp that, they're going to use him to the best of his ability, which he said is a penetrating type of, defensive line play. And that they're going to attack a little bit more. And he mentioned something about holding runners to 3 yards or less. And I was like, I like hearing that, man. That'd be great if you could do that. Yeah. But and you're not going to be able to do it on every play. But I'd like to see more of, especially Cody Barton last year. He especially suffered because he was just confused. You could tell. And that's just the way he is. He gets kind of wild, and and I think he's a good linebacker, but he's kind of distracted, and he gets distracted easily, and I think that hurt him worse than anything. So I'm hoping that you're going to see something totally different this year as far as the run defense goes.
One of the things I struggled with watching the team and writing about them last year was it didn't feel like there was a lot of conviction to the type of approach that the team had. And I wonder how much of that, you mentioned this guy at the top, I wonder how much of that had to do with their plan for Jamal Adams and bringing him down in the box. We heard a lot about when they were interviewing Clint Hurt and Sean Desai and some of these others. How are you going to use this guy? How are you going to weaponize Jamal Adams? Because he's not just a coverage safety. In fact, that's a disservice to his skill set, I think. And so game 1, he's out for the season. And it's not really replaceable. We had Mike Dugar on. He was talking about how he was talking to Ryan Neal and Kobe Bryant, and all of a sudden they're being asked to come up and set edges, in the run game and take on pulling guards and offensive tackles, and they're not built for it. Do you think that from a schematic standpoint, the defense had trouble adjusting to the early season injury of Jamal?
Yeah, I think yes. And the reason why is because, last year in camp where we set up our radio show is right where the defensive linemen are working out. And a lot of times they'll just walk through things. And the other guys that are involved that are going to be playing behind that are also in that walkthrough. And Jamal Adams was over there almost every time. He's not with the defensive backs. Wow. He was with the front 7. So yeah, that was a huge loss to them. And I think they would have done things a lot differently if they were going into camp knowing that they weren't going to have Jamal Adams. So whatever he did in 2020. So that was the pandemic year. I got a chance to go down to camp, and that was, we had to go up on the berm and wear our mask and everything. Nobody could talk to anyone, but I went to a lot of those practices, and if you didn't know who number 33 was, you'd be like, who is that guy?
Yeah.
He was just all over the field.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of times you see it not translate onto the field. That first game against Atlanta in 2020, he was just nails. I mean, he was setting the edge. He's doing everything right. Him and Quandre Diggs together, they were just, probably the best safety tandem in the league. So, yeah, it's a huge loss with him. And a lot of people have said he's a disappointment. It's disappointing that he got hurt, but that dude can play. He can play football, man. He loves it. So, yeah, I thought it made a huge difference last year. And I wonder if they're going to go in this year, with a little bit more caution. Just like, okay, let's plan, what's the contingency if Jamal Adams happens to go down again?
Yeah, you really touched on a couple of things I was going to ask you about, and maybe we can dive into them a little bit further because, yeah, I think Cody Barton was a bit of lightning rod for criticism. I think a lot of it was justified. He just looked like a lost puppy out there sometimes.
Yeah.
But the linebackers as a whole took a lot of heat for the team's struggles on defense, particularly in the run game. And, the two things that jumped out to me seems like kind of in line with what you were saying. One, I don't think the defensive line was great at keeping blockers from getting to the second level. And then, and we've heard KJ talk about this too. It sounds like there were rather frequent lapses in communication and assignment discipline. Does that match up with your observations of the linebackers? And am I missing anything here?
They weren't playing together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I would put it, which is all the things that you just said. I mean, they just, and you saw lots of times, and I mentioned that ripple effect. And I remember Quandre Diggs putting his hands up in the air a bunch of times, just like, what are we doing here? It just didn't seem to make sense. I know this, they've got a couple of really smart guys on their defensive staff. Trying to remember the name of the new coach, but they got a new pass rush coach. It used to be Aaron Curry, which I was always mystified by that. Just because, look, he was a linebacker in the league and didn't live up to expectations, but he wasn't really an outside, pass rusher.
Right,
so
right.
I think that'll be better. But you got a guy named Carl Scott, who's just brilliant, just a great defensive coach, and then Clint Hurt as well. So they need to figure it out. And I think they will. There was enough said and enough seen by everybody that run defense needs to be fixed. Now, and I'll say this, they were 31st against the pass for 2 years in a row leading up to last year. Yeah. And last year they were 16th. Now you might say, okay, well, that's because everybody was running on them, maybe a little bit, but also, they repaired that quite a bit. That was a huge jump going from 31st to 16th. So hopefully they can do something similar to that. Not asking them to be a top 5, top 10 against the run, but if they can make that kind of improvement, it's going to do the defense a lot of good.
Yeah. And I think Seattle is going to have an excellent offense this year. It's going to take some of the pressure off. This isn't a team that needs to be, like you said, a top 5 defense in order, I think, to even win the division. I think that if they can be consistently a top half defense, then they're going to give their offense enough opportunities to score enough points to win 10, 11, 12 games and challenge the 49ers. I do want to focus in kind of on some specific individuals with this linebacking core for Seattle. Last week, we talked about the D-line. As I mentioned, we looped in guys like Uchenna and Nwosu, Darrell Taylor, Derek Hall, and Boye Mafe, because even though they're listed on the depth chart as linebackers, they're a bit of a hybrid in that they spend a good amount of time rushing the passer as well. So for today, we may as well start with the Godfather. We've talked about him a little bit already. Bobby Wagner. He's returned to the team. He's captained for a long time after a 1-year hiatus with the Rams. And I think the decision to bring him back had a lot to do with vibes and leadership, but also installing that exceptionally high football IQ and the kind of discipline that the defense just frankly lacked last season. As a player, you mentioned him covering the wheel route on DJ Dallas. How much juice do you think Bobby still has when it comes to actually being on the field?
Well, he doesn't seem to have slowed down. And you know what's weird about that? If you go and look on Pro Football Focus, look at Bobby's percentage of snaps. Mostly it's like 95 to, at 1 year, I think it was 100%.
Yep.
He was on the field for every snap. So he's in his 12th year, if I'm correct. And, he's going to have to, they're going to have to cut that down. And I'm just wondering how that's going to go. I think that's going to be interesting, first of all. And then, secondly, there was they used him very differently in the defense in 20 and 21. He was almost like a stopgap guy that would just sort of stay back. And there's lots of times like he wasn't attacking the line of scrimmage at all. It was a fourth down, and he was just kind of shuffling to the outside, making sure nothing got through the gap. So I was mystified by the way that they used him in those 2 years leading up to his departure to LA. But, we'll see what happens this year. I mean, look, he's a big, strong dude who can attack a guard. You don't want to have him doing that on every play. He's not a battering ram, but he does, I think it's going to be interesting to watch how they use him this year, just because in years before, and last year I watched him with the Rams, and that's where I came to the conclusion. I thought that Ken Norton was coaching him differently. So we went to the Rams. You saw him attacking the line of scrimmage, So the only criticism I've had of Bobby is that a lot of times he will slip blocks. So what that means is you're going to run underneath your block, which effectively means you're going to go into somebody else's gap in order to get there. If you ever do that, you have to make the play. You can't be. And then the other thing is, it's like a pitcher with a changeup. You can't do that on every play. You've got to, do it every fourth or fifth play. I used to go up, hit the guy as hard as I possibly could to make him think, okay, this guy's just going to, batter me all day long. And then you run up there and you slip the block and try to make a play. So that was one of the things I thought, like I said, it should have been used more like a changeup, and he was doing it a lot. And, but I mean, look, other than that, Bobby is, we always refer to him as a Hall of Famer, and he's going to be. He's just incredibly productive. He can do everything. He's a great athlete. So, but I'm very curious to see, number one, the snap counts, and number two, like how do they use him versus what we saw in 21 and 20 or what we saw last year with the Rams.
Yeah, I am too. And I hadn't noticed that with Bobby, him slipping blocks. It's like in basketball, right? Like you got to fight over the top of a screen. You can't go underneath it because you're just going to give the shooter the room he needs to get the shot off. And, for me, the real value of Bobby Wagner is I like to see the defense as like a solar system. And he's always been the sun that the other 10 planets kind of orbit around. And it felt like almost like a dog walker with 10 leashes, and keeping everybody where they need to be. And that wasn't there last year. I mean, I love the next guy we're going to talk about, Jordyn Brooks, and we'll get to him in a second, but there's so few guys who can do what Bobby does from that standpoint. So I think having that back is going to be good, not only for on-field results, but also from a standpoint of showing these guys what that looks like, and also freeing up these other guys, knowing like, hey, the center of the defense is taken care of from an assignment standpoint, and the ability to recognize audibles and pre-snap adjustments and things like that is going to make it easier for the other guys to just play and not have to worry about missed assignments. But you talked about how he attacked more in LA, and we saw it in the 2 games against Seattle. I mean, I think he had like 3 turnovers in those games and a sack. And you're right, in 2020, 2021, they weren't having him do that. His explosive plays were non-existent. Sure, he'd lead the NFL in tackles, and a lot of that had to do with the fact defense couldn't get off the field. He was just out there for more plays. But also, he wasn't getting tackles for losses. He wasn't picking the ball off or forcing fumbles or getting sacks. And I'm hoping that this new chapter allows him to be a little bit more of a disruptor.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other thing, so yeah, that's part of the big mystery, I think, the snap counts and how they play him. Having him around, and Tyler Lockett crashed his press conference the other day and was asking, I don't know if you guys heard that, something about what's with you getting here so early and this and that. But that, everybody thinks of the Legion of Boom of being just this ultra talented group, which they were. But the one thing about that group, when they had those defenses that were number one for, what was it, 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16 or something, which is still, to me, the best defense in NFL history. Yeah. I mean, anybody who has, 4 years in a row been the scoring champion, meaning the least scored. That it's scored on, I should say. It's pretty amazing. But a lot of that, so we thought it was like all this talent and everything, which it was. But a lot of it was like KJ and Bobby used to go after film and watch more film together and sit there and talk through things. And then Bobby comes in at, I don't know, 5:30, 6 a.m., whatever it is. And, he's putting the work in. I mean, those guys, Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Cam Chan, all those guys did that stuff as well. And so he needs to kind of bring that back because, yeah, you can put your time in and go home and everything. But if you have a guy like Bobby that's just setting that example for everybody, I think that, there's a lot of study that needs to be done. I mean, it's not rocket science or anything like that, but it's just a lot of repetitions and what they might do. And then they know that that they're going to do this. So look out for this and that. And I mean, that takes a lot of time meeting and watching film. And I think Bobby is going to set that standard this year with with this younger defense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, a lot of guys get drafted and they're punchers and you have to learn how to counter punch. You're going to face 17. Well, I guess you got divisional opponents. You're going to face 14 different offenses each year, and they're going to be making adjustments throughout the game. Can you adjust as well? And to your point about preparation, Bobby has one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard. He talked about falling in love with consistency. Like, you have to love doing the same thing over and over again in order to do what he needs to do. And that brings me to the next guy. We just mentioned him a little bit ago, but Jordyn Brooks was famously drafted as first rounder at a time when off-ball middle linebackers, kind of like running backs, you just didn't use first rounders on them very often. And that kind of speaks to what I was talking about earlier with Pete Carroll wanting to invest in that position. Yes, they paid Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright at the top of the league, and they earned it because they had the talent. But also they used a first round pick on that position. And, he's got all the talent. He's practically an athletic clone of Bobby Wagner in terms of his height and weight, his testing numbers and all that stuff. And he responded by being among the NFL's leading tacklers each of the first 2 seasons. But of course, he had that brutal knee injury towards the end of last year. And while his return date's still a bit uncertain, it does seem that he's progressing nicely. So knowing this defense as well as you do, what was your reaction when Seattle drafted Brooks? And what have your impressions been during his career so far?
Well, first of all, I kind of shook my head and laughed because they had Bobby and KJ.
Yeah.
It was kind of like when they took, who's the running back that didn't work out? We had Marshawn Lynch and kid out of A&M. I can't remember.
Christine Michael.
But yeah, Kristen Michael. It was kind of like a very John Schneider move. Mm-hmm. And we had him on our show, John, this year. He's a good friend of mine, but he's also came on the Wyman and Bob show. And just, he is more about, we're going to take the best player available here than I think people think. And that's why you got Jordyn Brooks there. I'll say this about Jordyn Brooks. Last year, all the confusion with the run game, stuff like that. There was 2 guys that I didn't see any of that from. One was Al Woods. Mm-hmm. I thought Al Woods played well no matter what. And then the other was Jordyn Brooks. Mm-hmm. He didn't go through all the confusion. I felt like he got it. There was just a lot of things that were falling apart around him. And, I thought last year he would make more plays because he's getting comfortable, but there were too many question marks on that defense for him to ever be confident enough to sort of turn it loose. But if you look at a guy that I think was drafted right after him, his name's Patrick Queen. He's a linebacker for the Ravens. If you look at that guy, he's made a lot of plays, sacks, touchdowns, interceptions, things like that. And I say a lot, but I mean, for 3 years, it's a pretty good amount. And Jordyn doesn't have those kind of plays, but I feel like he'll get comfortable enough at some point where he can turn it loose and start to make plays, and I think your first couple of years, you're so worried about, I say there's 3 parts of a play. First of all, get lined up properly. Second is, execute your responsibility in the defense. And then the third part is just turn it loose, be a football player and play the game. And I feel like Jordyn kind of didn't get to that part the first couple of years, but I think he will. And like I said, he was very solid last year, even though a lot of things were crumbling around him. I've rarely had criticism for anything that he did, even in the run game last year. It seemed like he always had his gap.
Yeah, and he was excellent playing next to Bobby Wagner as a rookie because I think he had that kind of North Star next to him. And I think he has all the talent necessary to be an all-pro linebacker. I think he's a very good tackler. He's got the athleticism. But like we just touched on, he's not on Bobby's level, and who is when it comes to play recognition, pre-snap adjustments. And one observation I had is, Wagner is so good at engaging and then disengaging from blockers really quickly. And I think that's an underrated talent as a linebacker, something that you're talking about, right? Being able to throw different pitches at blockers throughout the course of a game. Do you see that as something that's within Brooks's abilities to get better at?
Taking on blockers and shedding.
Yep.
First of all, I would say, I throw this in there. Jamal Adams is the best block shedder. I don't know what you want to call that, a shedder. I think he's
tremendous
the
shedder.
Let's go with it. All right, shedder. It's a new one. But yeah, I mean, it's like he has disdain for anyone that tries to block him. Mm-hmm. He treats him like get off of me, and he's really good at that. Some guys have that talent. I'll be honest, I haven't really noticed that much with Bobby, that he's just so fast, I think that's part of it. But yeah, I think Jordyn Brooks could learn a little bit from Bobby, because I think what Bobby would tell you is like, I'm not going to hit the guard. I want to hit the running back. And he's right. You should do that, but sometimes you have to hit the guard in order to hit the running back. So, and I think Jordyn Brooks has always done that. I think the thing that stands out to me about him is he's very responsible. He's like my older brother, my older brother is the responsible one, that always does right. And I was always the idiot that he had to kind of clean up and don't tell dad. Yeah, that's kind of how Jordyn Brooks sort of reminds me of. He's just like the very solid guy, man of few words, doesn't, talk a whole lot. But the other thing about Jordyn Brooks, I would say, is that, he went to Texas Tech, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at his film, they were using him as a spy. They were using him as a man-to-man coverage guy. Rarely saw him drop back into zone. And when his rookie year, he had a couple of drops, including one where he picked up a deep sail against, which is just a huge sweeping crossing pattern. And he turned and ran to the point. He picked that up really fast because he was not a zone drop type of guy. And zone's harder mentally than man-to-man. Physically, man-to-man's hard because you're going to get matched up with somebody that you're probably in a mismatch with. But, the zone part of it, of not jumping stuff in front of you, mm-hmm. Making sure if this guy goes out, somebody's coming across, everything that you see in front of you sort of is what your read is, what's going on behind you. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to that, especially in the NFL. And he picked that stuff up really well. So I was very impressed by that as well. I think he can be a complete linebacker by the time, he gets into his like third, fourth year. We'll see if this injury maybe slows him down just a little bit. I always kind of account for that, but because it takes away from your momentum. But no, I think he is as solid as can be. And I don't know that I would trade him for Patrick Queen.
Yeah.
Patrick Queen makes a lot of plays, but I've watched him play and I don't think he would fit into this defense.
He's a gambler.
Yeah, I agree. He takes chances. And
I don't think Pete wants that in the middle of his defense.
No. And well, if you get to a certain point and you have a certain status, like Bobby can be a little bit of a gambler, right? But for the most part, if you make a play, and I've heard stories of, somebody just told me a story the other day where he got an interception and then the linebacker coach balled him out on the sidelines. He's like, I just got an interception. He's like, you guessed, you better not do that again. Or if you do guess, you better make that play. So yeah, it's, I think he'll get to that point where maybe he can, start to turn it loose again and maybe take some chances, educated, chances, meaning, okay, I'm going to, this is the cost of doing business. I'm going to jump this and hopefully get an interception with the risk that they're going to complete a 15-yard deep in behind me.
I'm glad you brought up Patrick Queen because I think he's a valuable reference point for Jordyn Brooks, not just because of the draft position, but because I felt like the Ravens fans that I talked to were a bit dissatisfied with his performance through the first couple years of his career. And it felt like things really took off once the team traded for Roquan Smith, who's established as a top echelon linebacker in the league. And it allows him to be that number 2 instead of that, lead dog in that position group. Bringing Bobby back allows Jordyn to step back into that role, think less, just do. Just having his presence just to push him down the line a little bit, how does that impact his role heading into this year?
Yeah, I think that's a good thought. I agree with that. I hope that's kind of what happens, that he becomes that guy. But I don't know, Bobby might want to be the guy that's, you take care of all the other things and I'll run around and make plays. He certainly has shown the athletic ability to do that. But yeah, I think that could be the case. But also it's just your personality. I mean, I always say this game tests you as a man, as a person, your emotional toughness, your mental toughness, along with your physical toughness. And, I think that's something that, you either are or you aren't that kind of guy. I feel like Jordyn Brooks is that kind of guy. Maybe that happens where Bobby gives him the security to go run around and start to make plays. But I just think he's one of those guys that is dialed into what's right for the defense and, just being the solid. He's kind of the rock. He's kind of the rock of that defense. And I don't know, he's not an outspoken guy. He's pretty quiet. And, it's funny. I saw him when we were getting testing during the pandemic. And the one thing I looked at his headshot and I'm like, look at those linebacker eyes, man. Yeah. It looked like they were like laser beams coming out of him. And I was getting tested down there. I couldn't tell who was who except for him. I saw him. He came walking up with his mask. I'm like, I know those eyes, those linebacker eyes. He's got some fearsomeness about him. Or ferocity, I guess I should say. But yeah, I mean, he's just, I think he's just one of those solid guys that is always going to do right. He's really smart player. And yeah, having him and Bobby reunited, I think will be interesting because the last time Bobby was here, there was a few times where he was yelling at Jordyn Brooks, like, you got to do this, you got to do that. We saw that on the sidelines and on the field a little bit. And he took it like a rookie, which was cool. But, yeah, it'll be interesting to see them reunite and how their personalities have developed.
Yeah, Seattle didn't invest draft capital this year in off-ball linebacker, but they did spend a little bit of money. And they did that with a guy named Devin Bush coming over from Pittsburgh. And Bush is a guy who came out, his first-round draft pick, very highly touted, all the talent in the world, and played really well as a rookie. Then blew his knee out and hasn't been the same guy since. Pittsburgh let him walk. Seattle obviously took the chance on him. What have you seen from Devin Bush, whether it be just in camp or looking into his play before coming to Seattle?
Yeah, I think so. A guy who was my mentor, Keith Butler, who was he was a linebacker for the Seahawks and actually held the tackle record for the Seahawks up until Bobby. I think it took Bobby like 5 years to pass him. Keith was here, I think 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. But Keith was the defensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers when they drafted him. And, they overdrafted Devin Bush. They got really excited. Yeah. And I think somebody, said, look, we got to have this guy. And he had pull. And I thought, they moved up, I think 10 spots to get him. There's a lot of expectation with that, right? I mean, you come in that. I was always happy to be a second rounder, by the way. There's lots of pressure on the first rounder. I know you get more money, but I'm like, second rounder, everybody's like, yeah, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. So, yeah,
it's all upside from there. It's no downside. It's all upside once you're out of the first round.
That's right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe what was going on. We had a nice long talk with him on our show, and he's a great interview and a great kid. Kind of interesting body type. If you look at like his upper body, he doesn't look like, I think he's really strong, but he doesn't look like he lifts weights a lot. He doesn't have like the big, as Pete would say.
He looks like a defensive back.
Yeah, he does. But if you look at from like the waist down, he's got the power plant there, man. Yeah. I mean, he's got, the big thighs and all that. So, but really thoughtful guy. And I think he sees this as a chance to kind of start over. And I talked to him a little bit about when I went to Denver. So I played 6 years here, and then we got free agency finally. In 1993, I went to the Broncos. And when I went there, my slate was clean. Like your former team knows all the things about you that, oh, he's this kind of guy, or oh, he's that kind of guy, or oh, he'll do this. You go to a new team and you just get an entirely clean slate. So I think that's going to help him a lot. There's no pressure here in Seattle for him. In Pittsburgh, I'm sure they were talking about how he's got to live up to that first round status. He doesn't have any of that. So let's see if that benefits him. I think he can play. That guy can play. He's really good. He plays fast. But we'll see if that, kind of gives him the confidence to sort of turn it loose and be the player they thought he was going to be.
The way that they're building this defense, do you see him? And I'm speaking, let's assume Jordyn Brooks comes back at some point in the first half of the season and is mostly up to speed. If Devin Bush is the guy they think they're getting, are they planning on him being a high snap count guy? Or is he kind of like certain packages, we'll put him in, maybe give one of the other guys a breather type?
Bush, you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that. I really don't know. I haven't got a chance to see them, obviously not in a game situation or anything, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you said, you got Bobby, you got Jordyn Brooks, you've got him, you got some other pretty good, decent linebackers there, but I don't know how often those guys are going to be on the field. You know, if Julian Love proves that he can play the run up in the box, if Jamal can stay healthy and do that same thing, you may not see him on the field that much. So
sure.
Not only that, I mean, you get this ridiculous thing going on at corner where I've never seen anything like it. I mean, Trey Brown the other day had one of the best practices I've ever seen. Well, since I saw Michael Jacson have the best practice he's ever had.
Right.
So you got 4 guys that are legit to play corner. You got a couple of guys that are going to play nickel, like, maybe Julian Love, maybe this Jarek Reed kid from New Mexico. He can play in there. Kobe Bryant, obviously. You've got so many good defensive backs and safeties that who's the other guy? There's another guy that is just everybody is talking about. I have not really seen him play. Jonathan Sutherland. He's a linebacker, a safety out of Penn State. And everybody's just raving about him. And I've seen him make a couple of plays, but so they're really heavy in the defensive backfield. And yeah, maybe that means just less time for linebackers. So we'll see what happens with Devin Bush. But I think he's a really good player, and he's just got to prove it. And sometimes going to that new atmosphere helps you.
Oh, I bet. And we've gone in depth on the top 3 guys. I think those will probably be the 3 highest snap count guys, assuming health on this team. But the NFL season is long and it's brutal, and you need depth. And so, Mike, you've got a list of some of the other linebackers on the roster. Dave, would love to just get your quick thoughts on some of these guys, if anyone stands out to you.
Yep. So first off, we have Vi Jones entering his second year, undrafted last year. John Radigan is back after he blew his knee out the end of the 21 season, I believe. They just picked up Ben burr-kirven again after he had that knee injury that was accompanied by some nerve damage. And then, lest we forget about the special teams god, Nick Bellore, who is listed as a linebacker on the roster.
Yeah.
Who out of those names stand out to you the most, Dave?
Well, let's see. Vi Jones, actually, he shined a little bit last year in the preseason, and I think he got in a couple of snaps during I like him. I think he's a good piece, and, maybe they keep him around as a special team guy. But I think he has some talent. The guys you mentioned, I think all of them have a chance. I like Radigan a lot. He makes a lot of plays. He's a very old school downhill type of linebacker. And then who was the other? Oh, Ben burr-kirven. If you look at him, first of all, he looks like he's about 15 years old. And then he looks like he's built like a shortstop, I mean, he's not a big guy. That dude is always in the right place. Always. And, for coaches, I'll take that any time, and that's where in 2020, there was a lot of that stuff going on. And I remember he got in a couple of snaps, and he didn't get a chance to get in a lot because Bobby 100% of the snaps, but he got in the Jets game in 2020, and he just did everything right. I've never seen a player. It was like 10 plays in a row where it was just, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. Oh, look at him there. He's filling that gap. That's exactly what he's supposed to do. He's just incredibly consistent that way. It worries me about his ACL thing, that he had that nerve damage. But Ben burr-kirven is a super smart kid that is just, and like I said, coaches love that because their ass is on the line, right? I mean, they're like who I put out there as a linebacker coach, you know, that's my job. And so who do you trust? And on game day, that's what happens. It's like, who do I trust out there? I don't care what his body build is or how fast he is. If I trust this guy, and that's the thing about burr-kirven, he's always going to be in the right place. So if I was some of those young guys, I'd sit next to Bobby, certainly, but Ben burr-kirven is another guy that just incredibly smart football player.
Yeah, and zooming back out here, one of the big questions facing this team, maybe the biggest question facing this team, is what scheme are they going to run on defense? I don't know that they ever got clear on that last year, and it's been kind of tough to discern from the coaches and what they're going to be doing this year. Maybe they're being a little coy about it, but what have you been hearing, and what are you anticipating from a schematic standpoint with this defense?
Yeah, I mean, we always hear that the 3-4 with the 4-3 principles and 4-3 with the 3-4 principles. Right. And really, I mean, the difference between those two defenses is personnel. Are you going to have 4, defensive linemen out on the field that really can't drop? And then I don't know if you noticed the year before that, which I hated it. The zone blitz is what we used to call it.
Oh, we noticed it.
Yeah,
Let's just have Carlos Dunlap out covering slot receivers.
I used to complain about that when I was a player. I was like, why are you dropping that guy into coverage? He doesn't know what to do.
Drove me
Benson
batty.
Mayowa one-on-one with Najee Harris.
The only reason you do that is to shock or surprise the offense, and we did it.
It was
so
like our
often.
base defense.
Well, it was like throwing, like I said earlier, it's like throwing a changeup on every play.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's supposed to be here and there, and you're supposed to catch the other team by surprise, but when you do it 50 times. No, anyway, so done with that rant. But what were we talking about?
No, just kind of, as you've been around camp and talking to guys involved with the team, if you had to guess what they're going to run this year, I mean, can you even?
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on who's going to play. I mean, it's not that huge of a difference. To me, it's not the scheme. Scheme means, who do you have on the field? Do you have a guy with his hand in the dirt, or do you have a guy in a 2-point stance? And that's really not a huge difference. But my question is going to be, how do you play your run gaps? I think that's the most important thing. And I think that they tried to do too much last year, like I said, as far as catching and reading and things like that. So, I think, and, it's funny, Brock and Salk, they have Pete on all the time. And Pete, will tell them things every once in a while. And he said to them, because I'm not in the meeting room, so I don't know what's going on, obviously. Sure. But he said a lot of these things will make your head spin.
Okay.
As far as these, I mean, it looks like it's pretty simple, and these are just, putting one guy here and one guy there. The only thing I would say about that is you want to have a defense where guys don't have to think too much. You're just reacting. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to think through it, and I thought that's what it looked like they were doing last year, then that's something that probably, you got to know your players and know whether they can handle it or not. Maybe Bobby can, bring enough leadership and, get everybody going that they can remember and do that kind of stuff. But it has to make sense out on the field. I had a lot of questions for coaches when I was playing, like, why are we doing it this way? Why don't we do it this way? What's the logic? And most of the time, Tom Catlin, who was my defensive coordinator, he would explain it to me and I'd say, oh, okay, I get it. Sometimes there were other coaches that just didn't know, like, well, because, if it's like, okay, this guy goes in motion, then you got to do this. And now all of a sudden you're going, okay, I have that rule. That's an exception. And then another thing happens. Okay, that's an exception. It should all just make sense to you so that when the ball snaps, you're able to execute your responsibility and then, go make a play. And I thought that was what was missing last year.
Well, I think a lot of the best defenses, certainly in my lifetime, have been that. It's if X and Y, then Z, and not introducing too many variables. And I think it's, that was almost a hallmark of the Legion of Boom defense. Obviously, you had incredible personnel, but also they weren't pulling a whole lot of punches. And you have to be able to do that. Like you say, you got to be able to throw the change up, but I do find, and I'm so glad you hit on what I think is maybe the most under-discussed point when we talk about defensive scheme is it does revolve around personnel, and you got to play to the strengths of the guys who are actually on the field instead of asking them to do things that maybe they've never done before. And look, some circumstances are going to dictate that you need to do that once in a while, but isn't it a little funny that Pete Carroll has long carried this reputation, well-deserved, of wanting to run the ball and just kind of be big and tough on defense and man up and not make you guess. And now all of a sudden you look at this team's personnel in 2023, 14th year for Pete Carroll. They, on offense, they're looking like we're going to see a lot more 11 personnel. Certainly you'd like to think that you got those 3 wide receivers. They're all going to be on the field. Their neutral game pass run splits have trended towards passing for the last 3 years. And now on defense, we might be seeing a lot of nickel and even dime coverage where they're, like you said earlier, only one off-ball linebacker on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to play whatever suits your personnel. What kind of people do you have? And that's how I used to do it when I coached high school football. It was like if I was a D coordinator a couple of years, I think with Lake Washington and Interlake, and so I would look at like, what do we got here? Oh, we got some big guys, so let's go with the 4-3. Where there's 4 linemen, 3 linebackers, and and that's you go off of that. You mentioned the 11 personnel, which is a tight end, a running back, and 3 wide receivers. And, that's I loved the 13 personnel last year, which was 3 tight ends.
They were
and
really
1 running
effective
back.
with it, too.
They were really good with it, and they seemed to always find an open guy. And I think those guys are – Colby Parkinson had a nice catch for a touchdown the other day. He really came on, and he also became a really good blocker. So you get more firepower as far as the run game goes with 13 personnel, 3 tight ends, 1 running back. And I think that, and then also you can run all kinds of play action off of that. So I'll be interested to see how good is Njigba, like, is he so good that they're going to kind of go away from the 3 tight end set and go to more 3 wide receivers?
Man, if camp is any indication.
Yeah. So, I mean, and, Schneider said that guy's a top 10 pick if he doesn't get hurt at Ohio State his senior year. So Jacson,
we said the same. We said the same thing when we had Bump on talking wide receivers. I mean, I think that if he was able to come out after his sophomore year, I think he's the first wide receiver off the board in what was a loaded class. That's going to be super interesting to see.
Yeah. So, and he was the number 20 pick, so he's going to play.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it'll be that's my big question on offense. The other thing is just how durable these running backs can be. You see all the stuff going on with the running backs. You never see 30-year-old running backs, not since like Frank Gore or Adrian Peterson. And then, just if
Seahawks legend Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he turned Rashad Penny around, supposedly. I think he did, actually. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, those guys, are they going to be able to stay healthy? Because they're already, Charbonnet and I guess Walker both have had little – problems, and they had to bring a guy in, and we'll see about their durability. But yeah, that's a big question mark there as well.
I want to ask you one last question about the defense before we get out of here. I remember leading up to Super Bowl 43 when everybody was either predicting a Broncos blowout win or a really tight game, and you came out and you said they're going to kill them. The Seahawks are going to kill these guys. That had to have been based on just not only their performance, of course. I mean, this was, like you said, maybe the best defense of all time going against maybe the best offense of all time. But also they just had unbelievable cohesion, swagger. Nobody's going to beat us. And they set the tone early in that game. You were the only person I heard predict anything close to the outcome that we actually saw. Do you see any way? I'm not saying that this is going to be the best defense of all time again. We'll never see that again. But can they get back in the next 2 years with these guys to that level of, come get us. We're going to knock you the F out.
Yeah. Interesting you say that, because I've compared the last 2 drafts to 2010 and 11. And that's where they got Sherm and KJ and Earl. And, it's still young guys that are unproven. I'll tell you what, guys, if they can get something even close to what they got out of their draft class last year, their rookie year, I mean, everybody except Bo Melton and Tyreek Smith contributed. And Tyreek Smith is back out there. and he's wearing number 92. Hopefully that doesn't curse him. That was my jersey number. He's going to nothing but injury. No, I'm kidding.
He's got to do the Brandon Mebane jelly roll after every sack.
Yeah, that's right. More famous number 92 there. But yeah, I mean, he got hurt during like mini camp or something and never played. And then Bo Melton, I think, ended up on a different roster. But everybody else, even Derek Young, the kid out of the small school, trying to remember, Lenore or something. There was a safety from New England has a safety from there.
Lenore Ryan.
Lenore Ryan, yeah. So I mean, small school guy that still contributed quite a bit. And then, I have to tell you, both tackles, Boye Mafe, Ken Walker, I mean, Kobe Bryant, Tariq Woolen. If they can get, like 4 or 5 guys from this class to contribute, and I think they can, because you got the guys that are on the inside, like Cameron Young, who we talked to the other day. That's a big, scary looking dude.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to play nose guard. I mean, mentally, it's hard physically, but if they can get something out of those guys, yeah, they can start to head towards that. And you start to see, hey, this guy could be a Pro Bowl or whatever. They could be heading towards that Legion of Boom era,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be interesting to see, what it's called, or, how different it's going to be. But I think, like I said, those 2010, 2011 is where they really, like, John Schneider was drafting guys and he was hitting grand slams and he didn't know it.
Yeah.
Didn't know it for a few years. And then, you realize that this guy can play and that guy can play. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if they are they in the early stages of building another defense that's just dominant like that.
If that happens, the sky truly is the limit for this team, because I think we have a chance to see one of the best offenses in franchise history over the next couple of years, assuming we don't get major regression from Geno Smith. And it's funny, we've been talking about the defense for an hour. We didn't even mention Quandre Diggs outside of him throwing his arms up in frustration a couple times last year. And just having a guy like that on the back end, I think, is going to let these linebackers play a lot freer too, especially with Bobby in there.
Yeah, typically your safeties, take care of it's a great vantage point for those guys, right? They're back 10, 12 yards and they can see everything and how it plays out. And Quandre is a great guy. Remember, that was a guy, what did we trade? Like a 5th rounder for, maybe?
Yep.
I mean, that was one of the more genius moves by Schneider, getting him and just seeing that, what kind of player that he was. So, yeah, I love Quandre. He's got kind of he called it a gloomy disposition. He's sort of crabby. He's sort of cranky. And I love that about him.
Yeah.
I love it. So, yeah.
What? You love that about a player? Come on.
Yeah. It's old school, man. I saw the other day, there's another couple of guys there that kind of remind me of each other, that like they're sort of old school, grumpy, crabby, like I'm going to just slam you to the ground. One is Uchenna Nwosu. And by the way, the other day there was these running backs running through, which I remember this happening all the time, where it's called thud tempo, right? So you're practicing thud tempo, means you hit the lineman full speed, but then you don't tackle the guy to the ground. You don't tackle the running back. Well, what the running backs do is they start acting like heroes and running through your defense and everybody's cheering and everything. And as a defender, you get grumpy when they do that. So the other day, I guess, it was Kenny McIntosh was doing that and running, and the crowd was cheering. And so Uchenna had enough of that. So he went up and I guess just blasted him and knocked him to the ground. And, he's got that old school. Michael Jacson is another guy.
Yeah.
Michael Jacson, like, he plays angry. And then same thing with Quandre Diggs. So I love that. They're like grumpy old men, but they're tough as nails. And, those are the guys that kind of set the tone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, Dave, this has been incredible, man. We appreciate how busy you are this time of year. It means a lot that you took the time to join us.
I really appreciate you guys having me on, man. It was fun to talk ball anytime.
Yeah, we appreciate that, and we'll call you on that. Before we get out of here, though, where can folks hear more of you?
Well, of course, at Seattle Sports, 7:10, Wyman and Bob from 2 to 7. Most days we've been cut, short a couple of times because of the Mariners. But and then I'm going to start calling the games this year with Rabel from the booth.
Amazing.
Yeah, on 97.3 and 710sports.com and 710 Sports and all that. So, I saw Rabel the other day, and It's like I've known Rabel since like 1987, and we know each other pretty well. I always say I know Rabel, everything about him, and I like him anyway. So that's kind of that way with Paul Moyer too.
Yeah.
But no, but I love Rabes. Him and I never stop talking to each other, and we have so much fun in the booth. So I'm looking forward to calling the games.
Oh man, I can't wait to hear that. That's going to be awesome. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. As always, you can find Mike and I on social media. I am on Twitter at Jacson Bevins. That's Jacson. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Mike is also on Twitter, and yes, we're still calling it that, at Mike Barwin, and the show itself is at Cigar Thoughts. You can also find us on Instagram and Threads at Cigar Thoughts NFL, and on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at Cigar Thoughts. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article at fieldgoals.com/Cigar Thoughts. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Finally, be sure to check out cigarthoughtsnfl.com to get your exclusive Cigar Thoughts cigars. Or, like many of you have, hit me up on Twitter and I'll shoot you the details. And when you buy those cigars, please reach out, send us a pic, let us know what you think. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of this show. It's been amazing to watch it grow. We know you've only got so much time in your life for podcasts, and it is an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making it happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.